a little bit later, she actually released her first record after being turned down by record companies for being either too dark or too rough. And the too rough was because one time when she went to do a take of a song, she said, "Hold on, let me spit." and they were also appalled at that they kind of cancelled the entire recording.
So, welcome to Edinburgh International Book Festival 2021. This is, well, every festival's historic in its own way, but this is a particularly historic moment in a new site, back live, and with opportunities to join in at home. So I'm Adele Patrick. I'm a co-founder and a director at the Glasgow Women's Library. And the library's connection with the poet, playwright, memoirist, novelist Jackie Kay extends back to our origins 30 years ago in Garnet Hill. And I always learn something when I'm in the room with Jackie, so I'm so excited about spending an hour this evening with you, Jackie, and with the remarkable singer and actor Suzanne Bonner. And we're going to be talking about a truly remarkable book and a legendary woman. And for those that might find it helpful, we'd like to describe ourselves in our full glory. But in a second, I'm going to just sort of give you an idea about this space. So we're in a fabulous neoclassical building with beautiful graphics and, yeah, a wonderful live audience. I am a white older woman. I'm coming to terms with that. I'm in a blue dress, and I've got short blonde hair, and I've got gold shoes. Jackie, would you like to describe yourself?
Oh, it's really hard to describe myself. Well, at the moment I'm wearing a red and maroon striped shirt. It's got a red bangle, red watch, red trousers. I remember once going to a school in Lancashire, and the woman saying to me, "Do you know, I've heard you a lot on the radio, and in my mind you were tall and slender." And then she said, "Just shows you what the radio could do, don't it?" So now I don't get to be tall and slender. Exactly. I just get to be my wee self.
Oh, perfect, perfect. And Suzanne, do you want to describe yourself?
Yes, I would like to say I've got a face for radio. I've got on an orange top, black dress, black trousers, and a sparkly headband in kind of nod to the Empress. And I'm a black woman.
Thank you so much. Yes, a round of applause. Thank you. So this event has been broadcast from Edinburgh College of Art, as I've mentioned, and we've been hosted by the University of Edinburgh in this new long-term partnership. So for this hour, we've decided that we wanted to bookend the event with song. And Jackie will be sharing the ways that her wonderful book was conceived. And we'll, of course, tuck in a little bit of time for questions before Suzanne is going to deliver a beautiful musical conclusion. So before we find out more about Bessie Smith, the book, from Jackie, Suzanne is going to bring a flavour of her own, in her own fabulous style, of Bessie the voice, and a voice that Patrick O'Connor, editor of Opera News, has called the most important voice of the 20th century. So the first song that we're going to hear from Suzanne, with very poignantly prophetic lyrics, was first recorded by Bessie Smith in May 1929 in New York.
Over to you. Nobody knows you when you're down and out. Hey. Once I lived the life of a millionaire. spending my money why I didn't care. I carried my friends out for a good time, buying bootleg liquor, champagne and wine. Then I began to fall so low. I didn't have a friend, no place to go. If I ever get my hands on $1 again, I'm gonna hold on to it till the meagre's grin. Nobody knows you when you're down and out. In my pocket, not one penny, and my friends, why, I haven't any. But if I ever get back on my own feet again, and I meet my long-lost friends, it's mighty strange, without a doubt. Nobody knows you when you're down and out. I mean, when you're down and out. When you're down and out. Oh, not one penny, and my friends, why, I haven't any. If I ever get back on my own feet again, and I meet my long-lost friends, it's mighty strange, without a doubt. No man can use you when you're down and out. I mean, when you're down and out. Woo! Thank you.
Thank you so much, Suzanne. And Suzanne has been really busy during lockdown, appearing in the Scotsman sessions and the frankly life-saving National Theatre of Scotland online Macca to Macca series, curated by Jackie. And I think, Jackie, you're on record as describing Suzanne as your soul sister. You've written 2 theatre shows about classic blues and jazz singers for Suzanne. One, I cover the waterfront around the life of Billie Holiday and every bit of it, the Bessie Smith.
Yeah, every bit of it I wrote, definitely.
Right, okay. So we're going to hear from Suzanne again later, but I just wanted to sort of give a little introduction, as if we need it, about Jackie. Just because it's a lovely thing to do. She's been a lodestar for me, for the Glasgow Women's Library, for this festival, for readers and writers in Scotland. Her work is read and acclaimed across the world. She's been winning awards and fans since the Adoption Papers was first published in 1991 and bagged the Saltire Society Scottish First Book Award. Subsequently, awards have included the Guardian Fiction Prize for The Fabulous Trumpet, the Somerset Maugham Award for a poetry anthology, Other Lovers, where I think Bessie provides the inspiration for a really striking sequence of poems. And from 2016 until March this year, Jackie was Scotland's Macca, our national poet. And her makership, I'm sure we would agree, was nothing less than triumphant, spanning the most challenging of years as COVID took hold. And I feel like your makership, Jackie, sort of demonstrated beyond doubt that literature in the right hands has the power to galvanise, to heal, to carry us through the most turbulent times. So thank you for all of us for that. I mean, there's so much to say about Jackie's oeuvre, but this evening, I suppose I can only encourage you to explore her work across all platforms, in print, in podcasts, broadcasts, and theatre, when you can get to see her work in that setting. As it happens, the book that we're discussing this evening was adapted into a really brilliant Radio 4 Book of the Week in February, and I think we can still revisit that. But Jackie, big welcome. So lovely to be sitting, getting a chance to chat about Bessie Smith. So this is a book that was first published in 1997, reissued this year, and the renowned jazz musician Ian Carr, the BBC music broadcaster, has called it the most vivid evocation of Bessie Smith I've ever read. The plaudits have come from other musical luminaries such as Peggy Seeger, Robert Wyatt, and critics including Guardian music journalist Kitty Empire, who have really lauded it. And I think she provided the most sort of telling description, or a description that I really loved about the work, not as a sort of like worthy biography, but she described it as a potent blues brew and an eloquent her story. And I wondered whether, Jackie, we're going to go on to talk about that brewing and how you came about making this amazing work. But I wondered whether we could start by situating Bessie herself. And you write about her as living a life that lends itself to legend, of her life being acutely emblematic of her times. And I just wondered if you could tell us a little bit about why her life, you feel, chimes with the history that she lived through.
Yeah, I mean, hello everybody. It's really lovely to be here. It's really amazing to be back in Edinburgh and to be actually in this fantastic new building. And thank you, Adele, for that lovely introduction. And thank you, all of you, for that lovely welcome. Bessie just lived the most extraordinary life because she was born into poverty in 1894, and she lived in what she later described as a ramshackle cabin where the rats outnumbered the children. And she lost her mum and her dad by the time she was 9, and so she was brought up mainly by her sisters, Tinny and Viola. And she used to stand and sing the blues in street corners in Chattanooga. Actually, recently my son was driving through Chattanooga and took a kind of screenshot of his, Google Maps to show me where he was driving through, and I found that kind of incredibly moving, the way that, he was saying, Mum, I'm driving through Bessie Smith's birthplace. And that was really extraordinary. But she then sort of managed to, her brother Clarence helped her join this travelling show, and she joined the Moses Stokes travelling show when she was only 16. And then when she was 19, she actually had a job in a theatre as a male impersonator. And then a little bit later, she actually released her first record after being turned down by record companies for being either too dark or too rough. And the too rough was because one time when she went to do a take of a song, she said, "Hold on, let me spit." and they were also appalled at that they kind of cancelled the entire recording. And it wasn't until Columbia Records came along and that she made her first record, Down in the Dumps. And it was kind of amazing, that record, because it sold 780,000 copies, and she got $200 per usable side. So very quickly she went from being extraordinarily poor to one of the richest black women in America, traveling around the American South. But then, her life kind of hit hit a terrible, because this is a very short précis, because otherwise I could spend the entire time just telling you about Bessie's life. But then her life, you know, hit a terrible tragedy. And in that time, she travelled all over the US singing the blues, and she actually bought her own Pullman train, so she would actually kind of defy Jim Crow racism and take matters into her own hands and not have to put up with that segregation. And on that train, she had sex with women and men, which when I was 14, I read this kind of rough biography of her that told me about her driving about in this Pullman having sex with women and men. I thought, she's somebody I want to know more about. It sounded wild to me, like absolutely fantastic. And then she hit, you know, 1929, 1931 came, blues went out of fashion, jazz came in, the Wall Street crash happened, and her life just suddenly dipped, and she went from poor to rich and back to poor. And then so that song that Suzanne just so beautifully sang actually tells the story of her life. It was prescient in that way that songs often can be, that when she actually sang it and when it was released as a record, she wasn't actually thinking that this was the story of her life, and it became it. So the blues were up ahead of her. And she died in 1937 in a very controversial car accident that I could also spend a lot of time talking about, but there was I write about that a lot in the end of the book, because that kind of it collided, everything collided, you know, the car collided, her arm collided with a biscuit truck, but it also collided with the racism of the times and with the way that people read the racism of the times. And so her story kind of told a story of a black woman in America whose voice was extraordinarily important, whose blues told narratives of women, who told the story for other women. And so women would turn up in their tens of thousands at these concerts all over because they felt that she was their voice. And when she died, tens of thousands of people, they had to actually move her coffin because there wasn't enough room for people to come and see her, and people just filed past. But none of the famous people that she'd become friends with attended her funeral or were anywhere near. So she'd gone from just nobody famous caring about her anymore. Nobody knows you when you're down and out. In her pocket, not one penny, and her friends, she hadn't any.
I'm rereading this new edition. You mentioned there about sort of almost like perennial themes, the narrative of her life and her blues, you know, having this sort of prescience about what was to come for her, but also sort of like themes that have endured over, you know, the 100 or so years since she was born. And I'm noticing in the text the way that you're looking at issues around, as you mentioned, the financial clash, sexual fluidity, the sort of ubiquitous racism, white supremacy, and so on and so forth. And even the sort of drag king reference is sort of like a revelatory thing. But I suppose one of the things that struck me rereading this new edition is how, I suppose because it's a rising concern again now, is that issue that you touched on earlier on about the impact of colorism on her personally and professionally. And I just wondered whether you could speak a little bit more about that, about how you mentioned that it had impacted on her getting jobs, but also in her personal life as well. I understand about Jackie and...
Yeah, it's interesting now, I mean, Adele, that we are talking about colorism, and we haven't really talked about colorism for years, but colorism by which people are judged not just by the colour of their skin, but by the shade of their skin, by the tone of their skin, was something that really impacted on Bessie's life. So she received a lot of really kind of, I guess, prejudice from all sorts of different people. And there was a kind of prejudice as well, a growing prejudice against the blues, where middle-class black people felt that the blues were too rough and that they showed them up. And so there would be a kind of a turning away from Bessie at posh parties by Karl van Vechten in Haarlem, where sort of different people of the art world would come in, and Bessie would feel suddenly out of place because she never really lost her working class roots. She was very proud of being working class, and she was always saying, I don't like those dicty blacks that are got airs and graces. She didn't because she felt kind of out of place, and she didn't know quite where to place herself. And the colour of her skin, she was actually turned down, as I said earlier, but she was also rejected by her own husband later, who then went and got a lighter skinned woman, and she was very, very, very upset about that, because she felt that he'd chosen her deliberately because she was lighter. So there was all sorts of things that were complex and difficult, and that we're only beginning to kind of talk about now. And that's one of the things that I find so fascinating about her life, because so many of those issues that were in her life, you know, that kind of discrimination, being told you've got to dress a certain way and be a certain way. You know, I heard Alexander Burke talking about this just the other day, when she was asked, when she came into the music industry, to use skin lighteners. Yeah. And this is like 2021, you know, really, really horrendous behaviour, and that kind of behaviour where people are not allowed to be completely themselves. Yeah. If they're black, you know, you're not even allowed. When I first started writing, you weren't really even allowed to be black and Scottish. You know, people thought that was a contradiction in terms. You know, and they say that's a kind of strange combo, and things like that. And it wasn't until I met Audre Lorde, the African American poet, who said to me, "You know, Jackie, you can be black and Scottish. You don't have to choose." And it was a very long and the and kind of stretched across the Atlantic. You know, all the way across the waters, this lovely long and it was very liberating. I was really lucky to have met her in my 20s.
Absolutely, and I suppose Lorde's writing as well. I mean, I would imagine it's never been more well read, you know. And I wondered about your book, Bessie Smith, having been published in '97. Do you sense that the appetite has grown in the intervening years for literature, for films that focus on black history and unearth the legacies of other black creatives? Are you sensing that the moment is
well,
right?
I think an interesting thing happened, you know, last year with Black Lives Matter, that for the first big time, there was a massive amount of white people also that took to the streets, and people that had a kind of a wake-up call, that thought, you know, this isn't on, and that kind of led, in a sense, to people wanting to know. There was also all sorts of black reading lists that went around, yeah, and films to watch, and all of these things, and people actually wanted to educate themselves. It was almost like, where are the missing people? There's been all of these people missing from history, missing from our lives, missing from our TV sets, missing from our films, missing from our adverts, missing from the ways that we read and look at the world. Where are they? And people went looking. So a film like Ma Rainey, for instance, yeah, kind of tapped into that. That film would have been in production for years. So it's just a kind of collision of things. And same with Bessie. Bessie was published over 20 years ago, but nobody actually. It didn't get any reviews at the time when it was initially published, and it didn't really find any readers. So the book itself has almost come into its time, which is strange, because also Faber decided to bring the book out long before last summer's happening. So sometimes there's just a kind of zeitgeist, something that happens in the air where different things come together, and we live in these kind of extraordinary tinderbox times, because of the pandemic, because of the things that are going on around the world, because of us all being isolated, where we're actually in our heads and we're thinking about things in a deeper way often, and some of that thinking leads to people wanting to know these stories, the stories that some of us have known all along and been interested in all along. So I think it's an interesting thing, but I kind of object to the idea when people say, oh, are you just interested in this now? I think you've been interested in it for years. Lots of us have all been interested in it. Edinburgh Book Festival has been interested in black writers for years. So it's not just a case of now, but it's a case of that now lots and lots of other people are joining too, and I suppose that's a really good thing.
Absolutely. I wanted us to turn a bit to you talking about deciding to tell these stories throughout your career, just wanting to know more and to explore more about the history of wonderful black women creatives. But I'd like to hear a little bit more about how you decided to write this text. And I noticed the way that you decided to capture episodes in Bessie's life in very different ways. So it's a really, really interesting read from the point of view of the different ways you might deploy poetry and prose and so on throughout the text, but also these almost like as though you're imagining eyewitness accounts of, for example, Bessie fearlessly taking on the Ku Klux Klan, which is like a really riveting read, and taking on Bessie's own voice. And I found some of the passages the most deeply affecting. And one extract that I wondered whether you might actually sort of share with us is a description of Bessie taken to the stage in the 821 Club.
Yeah, sure, thank you. Yeah. When Bessie sings in these clubs with the audience, literally spellbound, captivated, totally enthralled, she's not really paying them any attention. She's deep, deep inside herself, in the place where blues comes from. She has shut out the clapping and the stomping and the shouting. It's quiet in the 81 Club. People's faces are like stills. They flash before her sometimes in the middle of a song, like something she might see traveling on a train very fast, seen for an instant, then gone. She catches the odd glimpses of one shining face and another troubled one, and then she returns to herself. Sometimes she's sure she saw her sister Tinny right in the middle of that sea of faces in the 81 Club. Once, she even saw her dead mother standing for a single moment behind the bar. After singing the blues, she knocks down one drink, then another, full of a terrible longing for herself, for her family, for Chattanooga. The whole theatre is full of a restless longing. She gets people that way. She is right under their skin. She is closer than God. She hasn't made a record yet, but she has tapped the source of her own power, her voice, and she knows it is like nobody else's, and she doesn't want the distraction of anybody else playing with her blues. No, she is the blues. She is the blues itself. As far as she's concerned, she is the rightful queen of the blues, and nobody else can sing worth a damn.
Beautiful. Thank you. Thank you so much. This impression that we get in the book of this sort of, you call it like the libidinous, raunchy, fabulous Bessie, who's totally free-spirited, but there's this sort of that unbelievable paradox throughout. I mean, she's inhabiting these amazing milieus, you know, as she's on the road, as you described earlier on, but in contrast, there's this sort of, there's the Spider-Man, you know, there's the no-good man, and especially this sort of nemesis of the second husband, Jack G. And, you know, I just loathe this, you know, not reading the way that you talk about how although she is free and although she is spirited, this sort of fecklessness, the abusive, selfish behaviour of man. I think I was particularly upset about the loss of this cache of materials. A wonderful cache of photographs and so on and so forth that would have been an absolute gift for you as a biographer or any biographer, and indeed for a women's library, you know, that would have been a dream resource. But the way that you transform this episode of tragic loss, this disappearing trunk, into a sort of poetic fantasy had me in tears. You know, it was just so amazing. And again, I wondered whether we could hear a little bit of that, just to sort of give our audience a flavour of the way that these episodes in this remarkable life are sort of rendered through your own lens.
Yeah, sure. I think I'll stand up for this one just to give you a wee bit of variety.
Great, thank you.
So yeah, as you say, Jack G, and we'll maybe talk about him a little bit later.
Yeah.
But yes, was Bessie's second husband, and this trunk that went missing, as Adele said, it was just heartbreaking to think of all of that information being lost to us. And one of the reasons I had to write the book in this way was because of that, really. So I decided to try and imagine what would have been in this trunk and what would have happened to it. Before they died, Tinny and Viola, that's her sisters, sent it on a ship heading for Scotland. They'd seen pictures of Scotland and liked the look of the country, those big goddamn mountains. Could she send Jack up one of those and he'd never come down? Ben Nevis, they didn't want Jack to get his hands in that trunk ever. He was a dirty no-gooder, and Bessie should have known better. She ought never have married the skunk. A note to this effect is found 60 years later, signed by both of them. Tinny's writing is perfect calligraphy and Viola's is in big childish print. Inside, an old photograph of the shack in Chattanooga where Bessie was born. Nobody is standing outside it. It is just a shack. It is dark and leaning to the left. The window is partly boarded up. The door is flung open like somebody just left in a hurry. It's been taken on a bright day. The bright sunlight has blanched out some bits of the roof. An early daguerreotype of Bessie Smith's mother and her father. She favors her mother, got her nose and her chin, and especially her eyes. But she has inherited the shape of her father's face. Her mother and her father are standing side by side, and the electricity between them is still there in the image. An old poster advertising the two assassinators of the blues in the Mosey Stokes travelling show, yellow and curled at the edges. Another picture of Bessie herself standing in the corner of 9th Street singing, aged 9. A baby tooth next to a wisdom tooth, which has its long roots still attached, wrapped in newspaper. A bottle of bootleg liquor and a pint glass with a lipstick imprint of the lips of the Empress. A horsehair wig, shiny black hair that once long ago ran all the way down to the round shoulders of Bessie Smith. A strand of pearls and imitation rubies. A satin dress. Headgear that looks like a lampshade in someone's front room with lots of tassels hanging down. A plain dress with beaded fringes. A Spanish shawl. A skull cap with beads and pearls sewn into it. Feathers, ostrich plumes, an ermine coat, a giant bottle of Coca-Cola, a notebook in Bessie's handwriting of all her own blues compositions, a letter full of curses, again in Bessie's handwriting, to the manager of the 91 Club in Atlanta, an Israel record of downhearted blues, a reject selection of the songs that were never released, a giant pot of chicken stew, still seeming, its lid tilted to the side, a photograph of Ethel Waters. Underneath a sophisticated image, Bessie has written, "Northern bitch, long goodie, sweet mama string bean, 1922.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I wondered whether we might hear a couple of questions from the audience. We've got some wonderful music to follow, but I did want to make sure that an audience got a chance to ask a couple of questions, if that's okay, Jackie. Is there anyone in the room who would like to ask a question?
Hi, I wondered if you could tell us a little bit more about your relationship with Bessie Smith, like your discovery of her, why she spoke to you so much, and what made you want to delve into her life so imaginatively, because as you say, there is so little evidence left of her life.
Yeah, thank you for that. Well, I was first bought, my first ever double album was of Bessie Smith, and it was bought for me by my dad. I've dedicated the book to my dear dad, John Kay, and he was a great lover of the blues and jazz. And he used to sing Nobody Knows You When You're Down and Out. And when he gave me this album, this double album of Bessie Smith, I was kind of really drawn to it because on the front of it, there was a smiling face, and on the back of it, there was this tearful, sad face. And that album, actually, I didn't know it then, but it was like the two sides of Bessie Smith, because she had, as I later found out, a very, very complex character, and she also suffered from terrible depression, and she went through kind of real great highs and terrible lows. But initially, as a 12-year-old, being bought that album, I was just really drawn to the blues songs themselves, to the lyrics and the narratives, and to the fact that these songs would be stories that I hadn't heard about floods, about people being sent to prison, about people being the victims of racism, about kitchen men bringing women all sorts of food. Well, that's what I thought at the time, you know. So when she said, I can't do without my kitchen man, his frankfurters are nice and sweet, I just kind of imagined this. I just imagined this man with this big hat on, bringing her, there's your sausages, Bessie. and it was years before I kind of came round to find out of the double entendres of the blues. And so it's a kind of fascinating thing to kind of think back to the 12-year-old that I was, and kind of see myself growing up with her to now being somebody like nearly 60 and still finding in these blues narratives and songs something different. I guess, you know, she held up a kind of interesting mirror to myself, because I grew up in a white suburb in Glasgow, in Bishopbriggs, where there wasn't anybody around that looked like me, being adopted by my mum and dad that were both white, and it was just really me and my brother. And so it was really interesting any time that I saw a black face, and often the black faces that I saw were actually musicians. You know, there were Ella Fitzgerald, there were Dinah Washington, there were Carmen McRae, there were Louis Armstrong, there were Count Basie, and that I kind of almost built myself a kind of an imaginary extended black family that provided the people that weren't in my street or at my school. And I suppose also the depth of that actual voice really spoke to me and got to me and made me imagine all sorts of things, you know. So I used to, my friend, I had a best friend at the time that also really liked the blues, Gillian Innes, and we used to sit in her box bedroom with a hairbrush microphone and do these impersonations of Bessie and mime along to the songs, mime along to her and Pearl Bailey and other people, you know, tired of the life I lead, tired of the blues I breed. And we'd kind of love this idea that you could just tell it like it is, you know. If you're tired, you say you're tired. And so there's something about just being able to speak your mind and speak your mind through the blues that really attracted me. And the first things that I wrote were actually one of the first poems I ever wrote was called Talking Coloured Blues, which kind of, we know, is kind of a terrible poem, but it went something like, I was thinking the other day, a thing I don't do very often, by the way, about South Africa and the trouble over there and how it's not only happening there, but here. Cut it out. Forget about it. It ain't no good, man. It's got to be stopped. So I've got like all these kind of 12-year-old poems that were kind of playing around with the blues and trying to write my own blues. And in a sense, I think that's what I kept on trying to do, to sort of find a vernacular or a way of speaking that kind of blends Scottish words with blues words or with blues rhythms.
Thank you. We have amazing questions coming through from our online audience, and this is something that it's almost like something that I was really interested in as well. Janet M is saying, how much of the book was down to research and how much down to imagination? I know you've touched on this, but I was also sort of thinking about the slippage between the real and unreal, and it feeling really apt for the subject, for Bessie Smith. So I just wondered about that, you know, almost like how the research and your imagination, how you braided those things together in the text.
Yeah, I think that you know, Ali Smith was talking earlier. I don't know if you managed to catch it, but it was really, really fascinating, the discussion that she had with Nick about truth and art. And in a sense, you know, I had a certain amount of research that I did, quite a lot of research, reading every blues biography, and I went to the Washington Library of Congress in DC, and I watched old Zora Neale Hurston films, who was a contemporary of Bessie's, and that told me quite a lot about the time, and I spent lots and lots of time listening to her and listening to all of her contemporaries over and over again. But actually, the bits of the book that probably have struck a chord with readers are the imaginative truth, and it is still true. I mean, so the interesting thing is that your imagination, the truth of the imagination, the true stories that you tell with your imagination, and I think of those things, although they're leaps of faith, and they're leaps into what I think might have happened. I think there's a certain truth to them because they come from what I'm trying to grasp of her life now in 2021, looking back 100 years ago. And there are certain things that you can find out about. You can know, for instance, that it was actually quite regular for a woman in the 1920s to openly be lesbian, to go to a buffet flat, to be able to hang out. There was no big thing about being a lesbian then, and I would love to have been in 1920s Harlem. And, give me a time to have been brought up in or to have hung out in. I would have loved to have been around in the Harlem of not just Bessie Smith and Zora Neale Hurston, but Langston Hughes and all the artists that were about then, and be able to go to these buffet flats and experience that. I wouldn't have been able to eat a pig's foot now that I'm a vegetarian, but never mind. I'd have got quite far into it. But I think that kind of the fusion of the things that you factually do know and the things that you actually imagine were what I was most interested in trying to do. So thank you for that question, and hello to all the online folk that are watching. I don't know how many of them are out there, but special hello to you. I don't know where to look either, but I just look around.
They're there. I wonder, since you mentioned Pigfoot, whether we should invite Suzanne back to the stage, because Suzanne is going to sing a couple more songs for us. The first is Young Woman's Blues, and I think this was a song that Bessie wrote herself, and then Give Me a Pigfoot. So, Suzanne, over to you.
Just like to say thank you for being such a lovely audience, and thank you at home too. Here we go with Young Woman's Blues. Woke up this morning when chickens were crowing for day, and on the right side of my pillow, my man had gone away. By his pillow, he left a note saying, I'm sorry, Jane, you got my goat. No time to marry, no time to settle down. Well, I'm a young woman, I ain't done running round. I'm a young woman, I ain't done running round. Some people call me a hobo, some people call me a bum. Nobody knows my name, nobody knows what I done. I am as good as any woman in your town. I ain't no high yellow, I am a deep killing brown. I ain't gonna marry, I ain't gonna settle down. I'm gonna drink good moonshine and run these browns down. See that long and lonesome road? Lord, you know it's gonna end. Well, I'm a good woman, I can get plenty of friends, yeah, yeah, yeah. carry on with one that was kind of from the Harlem Renaissance, and it's called Give Me a Pig Foot, and there's a great recording where Bessie says, 25 cents? Ha! No, no, I wouldn't pay no 25 cents to go in nowhere, because you all listen here. Up in Harlem every Saturday night, when the highbrows get together, it's just too tight. They all congregate at an all-night strut. And what they do is tut-tut-tut. Old Hannah Brown from crosstown, she gets full of corn and starts breaking them down. Just at the break of day, you can hear old Hannah say, give me a pig food and a bottle of beer. Send me gate, I don't care. I feel just like I want a clown. Give the piano player a drink because he's bringing me down. He's got rhythm, yay! When he stomps his feet, he sends me right off to sleep. Check all your razors and your guns. We're gonna be wrestling when the wagon comes. I want a pig food, and a bottle of beer. Slay me 'cause I'm in my sin. Yeah, slay me 'cause I'm full of gin. I want a pig food and a bottle of beer. Send me gate, 'cause I don't care. I feel just like I want a clown. Give the piano player a drink because he's bringing me down. He's got the rhythm, yay! When he stomps his feet, he sends me right off to sleep. Check all your razors and your guns. Do the shim, sham, shimmy till the rising sun. I want a pig food and a bottle of beer. Slay me 'cause I'm full of gin. Oh, slay me 'cause I'm in my sin. Yay! Woo! Thank you.
Thank you so much, Suzanne. I really appreciate it. There was just a couple more things. I appreciate we've got a little bit more time, so I want to get the most from the opportunity to ask you just a couple more things, just about, I know that you've spoken about, and actually it would be great, Suzanne, if you could sort of feedback on this as well, that I've reading more about Bessie's lyrics and the way that she selected her songs, you're getting an impression of almost like a countercultural narrative of places and spaces. You spoke about the Buffy flats and the rent parties. Mm-hmm. And it's almost like we're getting a history that would otherwise have been lost through these texts, through these songs. And I wondered about, I know that in the book you speak about how maybe Bessie's texts are incomparable. You know, if you think about Dinah Washington or you think about Sarah Vaughan or other singers, that you're not getting that same degree of almost like narrative and storytelling about a particular time in history, just in the way that, you know, thinking about the songs that you've sung this evening, Suzanne. And I just wondered if there is anybody that you know that is actually doing what Bessie was doing, you know, now, who's actually creating narratives that are almost like describing the turbulence today and the things that are current for people. And I suppose also sort of, why do you think we need a Bessie for today? You know, if there isn't someone, I don't know whether Suzanne and Jackie, whether you would, who should we be listening to? Whose voice?
I think the important thing is that for me, it's remembering that it's about working class history. So the same way, like if history folk, and it's oral history. So often people didn't get the chance to write. So what's really important about these songs, and the more you look at them, and it's nice to embrace them, is that it is almost like a book, if you like, because it's about people's lives post-slavery. There was emancipation, but people still weren't really free. So I think that's the thing that I'm always reminded about when I do it, you know, this sense of working class life in America at the time that was still really difficult for people, and I suppose in their own space where they could let go and capture and retain history and resonance and words even, isn't it, the language and the music, and I suppose also the pentatonic scale that's in Scottish music, isn't it, the link to folk, and Bessie being a feminist, strong, independent, and in charge of her own sexual desires, which I think is really important, isn't it, in these songs that she carried, all of that, so that we can all hopefully still draw strength and keep learning, because it's an important history to keep alive. And
absolutely. Yeah. Did you have another question from online that you wanted
yes,
to
I'll see if there's another question here. If I can, I was amazed that I was managing that so well, but it looks as though it might have disappeared. Is there another quick question from our audience? Yes.
I wondered, because you wrote the book in 1997, would there be anything that you would write differently now in the context of today? You know, although obviously Bessie's life is history, but there are also still lessons for us today. You know, like sort of, so would there be anything that you would have dealt with differently?
Yeah, it's a good question. I did rewrite the book for today, and there were different things that I changed some words that were okay 20 years ago, but had changed their emphasis. I didn't want to kind of police myself exactly, but I didn't want the book either to strike the kind of wrong notes. So there was a couple of things like that I changed. I also wrote an introduction for it now, which was really to try and analyse the ways in which the blues still tell the story, and that because Bessie was a woman of her time, she is and because she was ahead of her time, because she was a pioneer, because she was really the first great blues singer, and everybody else came after her. The day that she recorded her last song, Billie Holiday came in and recorded her first song in the same studio. Wow. There's an extraordinary sense of kind of passing the baton on, but because she was a pioneer and so ahead of her time and so knew what she wanted to do with her voice and how she wanted to hang on to notes, how she wanted to tell her own story and tell the story of the people around her. At one point there was a terrible flood, and the people, when she went to visit, the people said, why haven't you written a song about this? And she sat down and wrote a song about that flood. And that was their song, and people were just amazed. So she was a chronicler of her time, and because she was a chronicler of her time, she's also a chronicler of ours, because pioneers don't just run ahead of their times, they actually speak to our times. And I find that a fascinating thing with voices, the way that they talk directly to our times. And it's almost as if Bessie, and see somebody like Audre Lorde, who's come out of her time and come back to us, that it's almost as if some people have come right back up to talk to us now in these troubled times when we're experiencing floods and fires and wars and isolation and pandemics and illness and death, that she's come back, and these blues speak to us now just as fervently, just as richly as they ever would have done. So in a sense, that's the kind of time updates the book, if you see what I mean. I don't need to update it, but what happens updates the book, and our own interpretation of what goes on with what happens allows us to see her life clearly and differently. But there's not really that many things that I would have actually changed apart from linguistic things, really.
Thank you so much.
Should I read a little bit about the death of her at the end?
Yes, please.
I'll just finish with a little.
That would be so great.
I'll just finish with a little bit of this is my imagining of her dying, and And I found this kind of a comfort to write at the time. Ruby is just behind him. There's even more of her left. She's got her whole face on the top of her shoulders. Just behind Ruby, in the distance, are Ma and Pa, standing in the rain. One last look at Ma's gold teeth, as if you needed to. But the strange thing is, a whole gang of people you haven't seen for years gathers round you when your arm practically comes off. The last thing you see are those faces from Chattanooga, way back when you were a girl. Your mother is still young, and you are her angel child. She has got your arm, and she's keeping it. She could stitch that arm back on herself if she was really alive, you think, and that is very nearly your last thought. Then you think, hell, I ain't never thought death would be like this. You ain't never thought death would get to you thinking about all of this stuff. When you're dying, you think fast on your back, and you can get in more thoughts in those dying minutes than you've thought your whole life, and suddenly you get a chance to see yourself different, picked especially for you. Shit, you even get a chance to see yourself dying. Not just see yourself dying, because that isn't important anymore. Visual things aren't important when the crunch comes. You feel yourself going down, like going down underneath the world, swirling, doing the black bottom all the way down. Your feet don't stop moving. You start to stomp. You're lying there in the road, covered in your own blood, and at the same time you're dancing down to death. And then everything goes dark, but the noise continues. You don't see your own death coming. You hear it. It's not just one loud noise. It's a whole gang of noise. Shouting, barrel housing, cussing, crushing, catting, piano, stomping, snare, drumming, car screeching, glass shattering, tires screaming, car weeping, noise. Death is loud. Don't let anyone tell you different. You ain't never heard such shit. That's the way it is. It's rough and dark. Don't let anyone tell you different. And where does that lonesome road take you? It takes you all the way down. You knew there was no place else. Feeling tomorrow like I feel today. Feeling tomorrow like I feel today. I pack my grip and make my getaway. The great thing about hell is the parties. Hell's parties are rough and dark, way better than Harlem's. They got pig's feet here you ain't seen in your wildest dreams, and beer to wash them down with that you ain't tasted in your sweet life. Dancing so fast you can't see your feet touch the rims of hell. They still do the camel, the shimmy, the bowhog, the skate, and the buzzard here, only don't call them that. They don't have any language in hell. No fucking words at all. It's all sensations. They feed you well, and they dance you well, and that's when you get to sing to raise hell. A lot of the old blues people are whipping it up. Well, 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 beyond the break of day. Thank you. Thank you. Let's take a wee bow. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Adele. Thank you, Adele. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Jackie. Thank you, everyone. Thanks, Jackie. Thanks, Suzanne. Thanks for bringing Bessie to life, and thanks to everybody for coming along this evening. If you're able, buy the book and buy other books in the independent festival bookstore. Books have been signed by Jackie. Make sure that you grab one. And the online programme this year is Pay What You Can. So if you're watching at home, or you know anybody who's watching at home and they're enjoying the festival, please consider buying a ticket, making a donation so that the festival can carry on. And thanks to everyone who's paid so far. So thanks again for a lovely evening. It's great to be back.